There is a moment in Rhaenyra Triumphant, the third episode of House of the Dragon's third season, that functions almost like a magic trick. A nervous boy with bleach blonde hair is pushed forward across a field between two armies, presented as Daeron Targaryen, the youngest son of Alyce Hightower and the late King Viserys. The Blacks accept him. The audience, primed by 2 full seasons of waiting for this famously absent character to finally appear, accepts him too. And then, at the episode's end, the trick is revealed. The real Daeron is still with Lord Ormond Hightower's host, which is not disbanded at all, but instead seized the market town of Tumbleton, his dragon Tessarion glimpsed among the banners. The surrender was theater. The boy was a decoy. The war that Rhaenyra believed she had won is very much alive, and it has been alive the entire time she was struggling to feed her court and pay her soldiers. It is, on its face, a simple con, but the fake Daeron twist is doing an enormous amount of work, narratively, structurally, and thematically, and it rewards a closer look than its pulpy surface suggests. It solves one of the show's longest-running adaptation problems while creating a new one. It elevates a character who barely exists in the source material into the season's most interesting antagonist. It exposes, in miniature, everything that is fragile about Rhaenyra's newly won throne, and it commits the series decisively to a version of the Dance of the Dragons in which deception, not dragonfire, is the decisive weapon, a choice with real consequences for where this story is going and how it will feel when it gets there. To understand why the twist lands the way it does, it helps to start with the scene itself. The episode opens on a broad green plain that looks, deliberately, like a battlefield about to happen. On one side stands the Hightower host, thousands strong, having marched up from Old Town under Lord Ormond Hightower. On the other side, Daemon Targaryen arrives with 2 of the dragon seeds, Ulf the White and Hugh the Hammer, dragons at their backs. The math of the confrontation is not subtle. Whatever the size of Ormond's army, it cannot fight 3 dragons in an open field. Daemon knows this, and he delivers Rhaenyra's terms with the particular sneering relish that Matt Smith has made the character's signature, bend the knee, disband the host, march home to Old Town, and live. The alternative is incineration, and Ormond bends. He kneels, he accepts, and as a gesture of good faith, the flourish that sells the whole performance, he hands over Daeron himself, the last of Alyce's sons still nominally in the field, a hostage of incalculable value. He sends the boy off with a stiff, blustery bit of paternal encouragement, the kind of hollow chin-up speech that tells you everything about the man delivering it, and the army's part without a drop of blood spilled. The scene works as drama even before the reveal, because it plays directly into what Team Black, and the audience, wants to believe. Rhaenyra has taken King's Landing, Aegon has vanished from the capital, presumed by many to be dead, and Aemond is unaccounted for. The Gold Cloaks turn. Alyce cooperated. The only serious army left in the field belonging to the Greens was the Hightower host, and now it has knelt. The war by every visible measure is over. Rhaenyra Triumphant, as the episode's title says, a title the episode spends 50-odd minutes hollowing out from the inside, until the final image of Hightower banners over Tumbleton turns it fully ironic, because of course Ormond was lying. The surrender bought him exactly what he needed: time, freedom of movement, and the removal of immediate dragon pressure from his army. The boy he handed over was a body double, some poor Old Town child with the right coloring and a rehearsed manner. The real Daeron, and crucially the real Tessarion, stayed with the host, which pivoted and struck at Tumbleton, a prosperous market town on the road to King's Landing, putting the Greens within striking distance of the capital that Rhaenyra believes is secure. What makes this twist worth writing 4,000 words about is not the mechanics of the con, but the layers underneath it. Start with the most basic one. None of this happens in the book. House of the Dragon adapts Fire and Blood, George R.R. Martin's 2018 faux history of the Targaryen dynasty, and the relevant portion of that book, The Civil War Remembered as the Dance of the Dragons, is written not as a novel but as a chronicle, compiled generations after the fact by an in-universe archmaester working from contradictory sources. That format matters enormously for understanding what the show is doing with Ormond Hightower, because in the book, Ormond is barely a character at all. He is a name attached to an army. The chronicle records where his host marched, which battles it fought, and how he died, but it has almost no access to his interior life, his conversations, or his schemes, because the chronicle's primary sources, a Grand Maester, a court septon, a court fool, were all in King's Landing, hundreds of leagues away from the Hightower column. Ormond exists in Fire and Blood the way a general exists in a textbook, as a line of march on a map, and that line of march looks nothing like what the show depicts. In Martin's version, Ormond's campaign is a long, grinding slog through a bitterly divided reach. The Hightowers declare for Aegon, but their own liege lords, the Tyrells of Highgarden, sit the war out. House Tyrell is headed by an infant, and its regents decide neutrality is the safer bet. Meanwhile, a substantial block of reach houses, including proud old names like Tarly, Rowan, Costain, and Caswell, declare for Rhaenyra. The result is that Ormond barely gets out of his own backyard before he's in trouble. Not far from Old Town, at the Battle of the Honeywine, an alliance of black-aligned Reach Lords traps his host against the river and comes close to destroying it outright. What saves him is Daeron, the real one, who rides Targaryen into the battle, breaks the enemy, and earns both a knighthood and the name Daeron the Daring. From there, Ormond's host fights its way slowly northeast for much of the war, gathering strength until it finally reaches Tumbleton, where the story takes the catastrophic turn that book readers have been waiting for the show to reach. None of that, the Honeywine, the Divided Reach, the Slow March, has made it to the screen. The show's Ormond simply appears within striking distance of King's Landing a few episodes into the season, his host intact, his path apparently uncontested. For book purists, this is a genuine loss. The Divided Reach is one of Fire and Blood's most textured pieces of world-building, a reminder that the dance was not a clean binary of green and black, but a mess of local rivalries, hedged bets, and old grudges wearing the war's colors. The Honeywine is also Daeron's making as a character. His heroism there is the foundation of everything the book later does with him, including the guilt and horror that define his final chapters. Cutting it means the show has to build Daeron from scratch by other means. But the omission is also, clearly, the price of a choice, and the fake Daeron twist is what the show bought with it. Consider the problem from the writer's room's perspective. The Hightower host is a slow-moving army plot in a season that is structurally about the aftermath of Rhaenyra's victory, about the Queen in King's Landing, unraveling under the weight of a crown that turns out to be mostly problems. Dramatizing the Honeywine would require introducing half a dozen Reach houses the audience has never met, staging a major battle one episode after the Battle of the Gullet already consumed a premiere's worth of budget, and splitting the season's attention at exactly the moment it wants to close in on Rhaenyra's psychology. Something had to give, and what gave was geography. The twist, then, is compression disguised as invention. Instead of showing the Hightower host's strength through a season of battles, the show demonstrates it in a single gesture. Ormond is dangerous because he can look 3 dragons in the eye and lie to them. Instead of building Daeron up through the Honeywine, the show builds anticipation for him through absence and misdirection. We meet his shadow before we meet the boy. And instead of the war grinding on because armies take months to march, the war grinds on because one man decided it should, which is a far more usable engine for television drama. It also completes a transformation the season had already begun. The elevation of Ormond Hightower from a name on a map into a genuine antagonist. The show planted this in the premiere with remarkable economy. When word reaches the Hightower camp that Aegon is gone and Aemond has claimed his place, Ormond receives the news of his own king's apparent demise with something close to a shrug, a beat that tells you in about 4 seconds that this man's loyalty is to House Hightower's position rather than to any particular Targaryen wearing its colors. James Norton plays him with a preening self-regard that reads at first as mere pompousness, the familiar figure of the overbred lord who thinks war is a parade. The fake surrender retroactively reframes all of it. The pomposity is armor. Underneath is a schemer cold-blooded enough to hand a child, some other family's child, to the enemy as a prop, and disciplined enough to kneel in front of his own army, absorbing the humiliation, because kneeling was the move that won. In this, the show is doing something it has done before, and done well, promoting a structural necessity into a character. Fire and Blood's format means the dance has surprisingly few active villains who can carry scenes. Otto Hightower filled that role for 2 seasons, the institutional schemer, the man who understands that power is administration plus nerve. With Otto gone from the board, the show needed a green mind for the audience to fear, especially with Aemond positioned more as a force of chaos than a strategist, and Aegon wandering the countryside on what appears to be a Picaresque detour with Larys Strong. Ormond is Otto's spiritual successor, and the show even makes the inheritance legible, the same family, the same Tower sigil, the same conviction that patience and misdirection beat fire and blood. Where Daemon opens the episode believing that dragons settle arguments, Ormond closes it having proven that theater does. That thematic collision, dragons versus deception, is the twist's deepest layer, and it is worth dwelling on, because it connects the Tumbleton reveal to everything else the episode is doing. Rhaenyra Triumphant is, on the surface, a governance episode. Rhaenyra takes possession of King's Landing and discovers that possession is the whole of her prize. The treasury is empty, the food stores are depleted, the rat catchers are all dead and the rats are thriving, the High Septon is hostile, Corlys Velaryon is nursing grievances, and the small folks' welcome has the shallow warmth of a crowd that cheered for Aegon 2 years earlier. Her hold on the city, and, the episode increasingly suggests, on herself, is a performance sustained by the threat of dragons overhead. The episode keeps returning to the gap between the image of power and its substance, a queen with no gold, a court with no candles, a triumph with no peace. Even the season's new title sequence makes the point, ending on a tapestry of Rhaenyra's victory that tears itself in half. The fake Daeron is that same gap, weaponized. Ormond grasps what Rhaenyra, in her exhaustion and grief, cannot afford to admit that her rule is currently an image, and images can be fought with images. He does not contest her dragons, he concedes to them, theatrically, and in conceding he renders them useless. A dragon can burn an army that stands and fights, it cannot burn a surrender. It cannot interrogate a blonde child for his true parentage. The Black's entire strategic doctrine, Daemon's doctrine, stated openly in this very episode when he fantasizes about using their dragons to conquer Dorne and beyond, assumes that overwhelming force ends arguments. Ormond's ruse is a demonstration, staged for the audience as much as for the characters, that force only ends the arguments people are willing to have in the open. There is a rich franchise irony here too. Game of Thrones built its reputation on the collision between people who believe in stories and people who believe in power, and its most famous catastrophes, Ned Stark trusting the paper shield of Robert's will, Robb Stark trusting a wedding, punished characters who mistook ceremony for reality. The fake Daeron twist runs the same con with the polarity reversed. This time it is the side with the overwhelming power that gets taken in by ceremony, because ceremony told them what they desperately wanted to hear. Rhaenyra needs the war to be over. Her city is starving, her coffers are bare, her son is dead, and her sanity. The episode is not subtle about this, is fraying at the edges. When a defeated lord kneels and hands over a prince, disbelieving him would mean the war continues, and she cannot bear for the war to continue. Ormond's genius is not the double. Doubles are an old trick. His genius is choosing a victim whose circumstances make skepticism unaffordable. This is also why the twist enriches, rather than merely complicates, the season's portrait of Rhaenyra's decline. The episode devotes most of its runtime to her deteriorating grip. The hallucination of Jace in the corridors, the screeching strings of Ramin Djawadi's score turning the Red Keep into a haunted house, the disastrous banquet, the confrontations with Corlys and the High Septon and Elise. Critics have already begun framing the arc as the show's deliberate answer to Daenerys Targaryen, a queen's turn toward fire, done slowly and legibly this time, with the pressure accumulating on screen instead of arriving in a single unmotivated snap. The fake Daeron reveal is a load-bearing part of that structure. When Rhaenyra learns, as she must, soon, that the surrender was false, that the boy in her keeping is nobody, that Tumbleton has fallen and Targaryen still flies, the humiliation will not be merely strategic. It will be personal and public at once. Proof to her court that the queen was gulled, proof to herself that mercy and restraint were exploited. Every force pushing her toward the fire just gained a new argument. The show did not invent this twist to give Ormond a win, it invented it to hand Rhaenyra a wound of exactly the shape her arc requires. And then there is the boy himself, the fake Daeron, the decoy, who deserves a paragraph of his own, because he is one of the more quietly cruel inventions in the show's run. Somewhere in the Hightower camp, someone selected a child of roughly the right age, bleached or found the right hair, coached him in a prince's manner, and sent him across a field into the custody of people who execute enemies of the crown. Ormond's parting words to him are bluff and hearty and utterly damning, a lord consigning a low-born boy to imprisonment or death with the tone of a headmaster sending a student off to term. The show lingers just long enough on the child's fear to make sure we register the transaction. It is Hightower pragmatism in its purest form, the same pragmatism that shrugged at a king's death, and it plants a question the season will presumably answer: what happens to a fake prince when the truth comes out? In a story increasingly interested in how the powerful spend the bodies of the small, Hugh's hungry family, the rat catchers hanged for one man's crime, the small folk conscripted as dragon seeds and then shelved, the decoy boy is the theme in miniature. He may be the single most vulnerable person in Westeros right now, valuable only as long as a lie holds, disposable to both sides the moment it breaks. Of course, no discussion of the twist is complete without addressing its most conspicuous flaw, the one fan seized on within hours of the credits, Targaryen. The logic of the ruse requires the Blacks to accept that Daeron has been surrendered while his dragon has not, and that is a hard thing to accept because a dragon is not a detail. Targaryen, the Blue Queen, is the whole reason Daeron matters militarily. If Ormond's host truly disbanded and handed over its prince, the first and most obvious demand from Team Black would have been the dragon. Flown to King's Landing under escort, chained in the dragon pit, taken permanently off the board. A dragonless Daeron is a hostage, Daeron's dragon at large is a loaded weapon with a pretext. Daemon Targaryen, of all people, understands the arithmetic of dragons better than anyone alive, that he would accept the boy and simply not press the question of the beast strain's belief, and the episode does not show us the negotiation that might explain it, whether Ormond claimed Targaryen had fled riderless, or was promised for later delivery, or was simply hidden from view and never mentioned. The end of episode reveal that the dragon is with the host at Tumbleton lands as a shock, partly because the show skipped the scene where the Blacks should have asked about her. There are ways to patch the hole, and the generous reading is that the show intends to. Perhaps Ormond claimed the young dragon had gone wild after the surrender and flown beyond recall, a plausible lie in a world where the cannibal and sheep-stealer exist, and where this very season has shown a barely tamed dragon slipping its rider's control. Perhaps the negotiation happened off-screen and will be recounted in the aftermath, when Rhaenyra's council conducts its inevitable post-mortem of how they were fooled. Perhaps, and this is the reading that best fits the episode's themes, the Blacks did not ask because they did not want to ask, because pressing the question risked collapsing a surrender they needed to be real. Self-deception has been the connective tissue of the whole episode. Rhaenyra seeing her dead son in corridors, Daemon dreaming of world conquest, a court pretending an empty treasury is a temporary embarrassment. A version of events in which the Queen's negotiators simply declined to look too closely at the gift horse would be entirely of a piece with everything around it. But that reading has to be earned in future episodes. As aired, the dragon problem is a visible seam in an otherwise well-tailored con, the kind of shortcut that the franchise's late-period Game of Thrones seasons taught viewers to be vigilant about. The difference between a clever twist and a cheat is usually one scene of due diligence, and the show owes us that scene retroactively. The more interesting question is not how the trick worked, but why Ormond believes it can lead anywhere. Here the fan speculation has been genuinely fun to watch, because the ruse examined coldly buys the Greens days or weeks at most. The Blacks hold King's Landing with multiple dragons, Syrax, Caraxes, Silverwing, Seasmoke, Vermithor among them, and even with Daemon dispatched to the Vale to squeeze fealty and gold out of Lady Arryn, the remaining strength at the capital dwarfs a single young dragon and a footsore host. Tessarion is small, the Dragonseed's mounts are old and enormous. On paper, taking Tumbleton announces your position and invites annihilation. Ormond has been written across 3 episodes as anything but stupid, which means the show is inviting us to assume he knows something we are only beginning to see. And book readers know exactly what that something is, because it has been hiding in plain sight all season. The Green's path to victory at Tumbleton does not run through battle. It runs through betrayal. Every episode this year has spent quiet minutes on the sour, slighted resentment of Ulf the White and the anxious calculations of Hugh the Hammer. Low-born dragon riders knighted and then shelved, promised much and paid little, one of them with a family in, of all places, Tumbleton. In Fire and Blood, the town's name is a byword for treachery and atrocity. The battle there is decided when dragon seeds change sides mid-fight, and what follows is one of the most infamous sacks in Westerosi history. The show has clearly kept that destination while redesigning the road, and the fake Daeron ruse is the redesigned road. Ormond does not need to beat the Black's dragons. He needs to be close enough, with a credible force and a live dragon, to make defection a rational choice for men the Queen has spent 3 episodes failing to value. The false surrender was never the plan, it was the plan's opening move, a way to arrive at the board intact. Seen from that angle, the twist also solves the show's oldest and strangest adaptation debt, Daeron himself. Elise's 4th child has been a running joke in the fandom since the first season, mentioned in passing, fostered off-screen in Old Town, absent from family gatherings where his absence went unremarked, to the point where the writers publicly acknowledged the awkwardness. 2 full seasons of build-up created a problem no ordinary introduction could satisfy. Walk Daeron on screen in Season 3, and the moment is either anticlimactic or absurdly overweighted. The decoy gambit turns the liability into material. The show gets to stage Daeron's introduction twice, once as a false face, once as the true one, and the falseness of the first makes the audience complicit in the family's ignorance. Neither Rhaenyra nor Elise nor the viewer has seen this boy since he was small. Nobody in King's Landing can actually verify him, and that unverifiability is precisely what Ormond exploits. The twist converts a production oversight into a plot mechanism and a theme. Daeron has been a name without a face for so long that a face without the name can stand in for him. There is even a poignant reading available for the real Daeron, whenever he fully arrives, a boy so forgotten by his own family that his forgery went undetected, fighting for a house that just demonstrated exactly how expendable boys of his coloring are. Whether the gambit ultimately works as television will depend on execution the audience has not yet seen, and it is worth being honest about the risks. The show is now running a plot on borrowed logic. It needs the Tessarion question answered, it needs the Black's failure of due diligence dramatized rather than ignored, and it needs Ormond's endgame to cohere with the timetable of dragons that could reach Tumbleton in an afternoon. It has also traded away real things to get here. The honey wine, the divided reach, Daeron the Daring's heroic making, and those losses will be felt most keenly if the show wants us to grieve for Daeron later, as the book eventually asks readers to do, without ever having shown us the boy at his best. Invented material in this franchise carries a specific burden of proof, the memory of late Game of Thrones, when cleverness on the page stopped surviving contact with the screen, hangs over every off-book swing this series takes. and yet the early returns on this particular swing are hard to argue with. In one episode, the show minted a genuine antagonist from a footnote, humiliated its protagonist in a way that accelerates rather than interrupts her arc, repaired a 3-season continuity embarrassment, staged its themes, image against substance, ceremony against force, the expendability of the small, inside a single fieldside handshake, and loaded the season's back half with a destination that book readers dread and show watchers can feel coming without knowing its shape. That is a great deal of value to extract from one frightened, bleach-haired child walking across a field. The Dance of the Dragons has always been a story about how the people who believe most fervently in dragons are undone by everything dragons cannot do. The fake Daeron twist is that story in miniature. The Blacks won the field the moment Ormond knelt, and lost the war a little in the same instant, because they mistook a performance of surrender for the thing itself. In a season that keeps insisting, scene after scene, that a crown is also only a performance, and that the realm is full of people learning to